So before what we've done is in my other training, what we typically do is, if you recall, I start out with an AI role plan. And so what that does is it creates a matrix of your core competencies for your role across the top. And then underneath, it gives you 8 deliverables for that role. So you end up with this nice 64 deliverable matrix that you can then start to focus your AI scripting, again, prompting as well. Today, we're going to do something a little bit different, right? So I want to focus on project managers and some PMI specific things. So what I'm going to do is, as a project manager, you're usually holding other people to KPIs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you today how use a prompt. I'll give you access to the prompt library. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a 8x8 matrix of KPIs within that matrix. And I'm going to show you how to break it down, figure out a workflow, and then we're actually going to execute through that example workflow. So let's get started. So what I'm going to do is, and I'll share these prompts. And so we're going to copy in this first part of the prompt. And what this is going to do, this prompt, we're going to make sure that we edit. Whenever you look at my prompts, look for brackets. So things like this. And when you copy it in, you end up losing the italics. But we're going to do this for a role, my role as a project manager for a large healthcare. And so if you read through this prompt, this output is going to be a matrix without any additional information. I just want to list, just want a matrix of the items. Horizontal axis, it's going to represent 8 key KPIs, 8 key performance indicators or KPIs relevant to the role that we just put in. And you can give it more detail. You can pass in, if you wanted to, you could give it your whole LinkedIn profile. And then down the vertical entries will be under each of the KPIs. We're going to list the top 8 problems to be solved. Now, with any of these prompts, we're going to come out with a matrix, but what I would encourage you to do is go back through and if something comes out and you don't like whatever's in cell 3, row 2, 3, 2, or whatever, just go in and change it, modify it. By now you should be used to conversing with and collaborating with your LLM tool. And then, so it's going to give you a matrix, and I give it the format of the table. Again, I'll give you a link to the prompt. So we're going to go ahead and run this. Again, as usual, I'm running things in ChatGPT. Use whichever LLM you want to use. If you want to use Copilot, Claude, Gemini, whatever, you can use any of those, right? So here's an 8x8 matrix. And so it talks about reduce patient wait times, increase on-time delivery. And so what we want to do is we're going to go into prompt 2. What we're going to want to do is we're going to want to one of these KPIs. So let's look at something that's interesting. Right? Minimize appointment scheduling bottlenecks, decrease falls and preventable injuries, increase on-time delivery, eliminate project creep. All these are pretty interesting, but you can go through and, like I said, do this in 8x8. And if you don't like one of these columns, maybe you don't care about decreasing operational costs, you could just kill that one. So what I'm going to do is scroll back over and let's see what's fun. Reduce delays in patient triage handoff. So actually, let's copy this in first. So now we're going to do the second prompt. This prompt is now give me an 8x8 matrix, pick one of the KPI entries. And I've mentioned this before, but when you ask the LLM to build a matrix, it needs to think about how it's going to create the columns and then the rows. So it actually goes through a multi-step process. So you get a little bit better answers to your prompts instead of some big detailed text, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to pick one, and on the vertical axis, it's going to give us 8 steps to solve the problem. And across the horizontal, we want it to give us names of experts that can help us solve this problem. Sometimes this doesn't always lay out exactly as we want, but I'll tell you how we can fix that, right? So we're going to do this. And then what was I going to pick? Reduce delays in patient handoff and triage, right? So let's see. And again, we're going to replace the bracket in here. So let's do that. And then let's give it a go. We're a horizontal, and then give me the names of 8 experts, right? Because we want to do, remember, when we're using a large language model, it's been trained across the internet, right? So anybody that's got information out there, whether it's books, other leaders in your industry, you'll know about them, right? So you want to be able to leverage them and leverage their methodologies and frameworks. And you can even develop your own frameworks based on taking a couple of frameworks together. In the last consulting company I worked with, we did that with the president of the company and the CEO. They came up with a model based off of Cotter, ADCAR, and a couple of other things. So they merged these frameworks together and came up with a different framework, right? And so it's going to go through, and like I said, so sometimes it does this, right? Where instead of giving you the actual person, so it says current triage and handoff workflow, and then what it does is it's giving you a persona, right? So what I'm going to do is, this is my kind of fail-safe prompt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, identify industry experts by name that can help me with these steps. You can play around with this prompt, maybe add that to the second prompt and be a little more clear as to what you're looking for. So that might be nice, right? So we're going to identify the experts by name. So it's going to search the web. In some of the tools, if you want to, ChatGPT will automatically go to the web now. And it's going to draw pretty pictures for me, which I didn't ask it to do, but that's nice, right? I like pictures. So expert matrix, reducing delays in patient wait time and triage, right? So now map current triage and handoff workflow. There's Dr. Supal, Dr. I can't pronounce anybody's name, lead nursing workflow mapping. So these are experts in this field. So it's going to go through and give you some experts, let you know what their specialty is in these areas, right? And so now what you're doing is you're building it up. So what I want to do now is I want to go step by step, and we're going to solve this problem, right? What I'm going to do is, we could do all the steps at once, but so that it's easier to see, what we're going to do is we're actually going to solve one problem. So use this as your starting template and workflow. So basically what I want to do is, here in a second, I got ahead of myself. That's basically a note, right? These workflows that we create, you want to use them as a starting point. Probably won't get to final here. This is where you're going to need to add your industry knowledge, do some research as you go, right? And so skip this down to here, right? So what I want to do is, so I'm just going to say for step 1, so map current triage workflow handoff. So for step 1, I want to identify the relevant expert, right? And so here's a number of them, and combine their collective approaches and create an SOP that I can follow. For all the steps in the SOP, I want you to generate a prompt that I can use as part of the workflow. And I want you to identify whether you can do it or if I have to do it. So what we want to do is we want to tackle this one, but we want to figure out, how can the AI help us? So let's do it step by step. So list the most relevant experts from previous matrix, just giving us a summary of what it thinks we asked it to do. Usually I like to check these if it does give you a summary, because if that isn't clear, then you probably need to work on your prompt. And again, you can feed your prompt back to ChatGPT and say, hey, help me improve this prompt. And it'll be more than happy to do that. All right. We're going to take care of step 1, map current triage and handoff workflow. So the relevant experts are a chief nursing officer, can you read? Emergency department, ED medical director, probably wouldn't want to be called that, chief informatics. And so these are the experts, and you'll pull in those names, right? So this is what we want to do. We're going to assemble a cross-functional team, just like you would do if you were going to do this at work, right? You might pull a group of SMEs together to try to answer a question. And so for step 1, it's going to be the prompt. So what I'm going to do now, since we have time, is we're going to open up another browser. Right? It'll open up another browser window. So we're going to open up another browser window and we're actually going to run these prompts, right? So this first one, we're just going to cut and paste it. So what is it saying? You can do it. I can help with the structure of the prompt or the staff invite email, but only you know your org's actual people. So list the key staff and stakeholders involved in the handoff and who should be present in the meeting. I'm going to just see what it does. It'll probably give me personas, but this is a case where what you would want to do is you'd want to put a list of the people in and what their role is. Let's go ahead and make this real world. We'll focus on the emergency department setting. Here's a breakdown. Key staff stakeholders. So clinical triage nurses, their role, initial patient assessment, must attend. So these are the people that you want in the meeting. And then some optional stuff that you might want to consider, leadership and stakeholders, and then who should be present in the workflow mapping meeting. So it's going to break it down. And then pro tip, right? If you want your mapping session to be productive, try to keep the group down to 8 to 12 people, right? So it's giving you some advice. Pick one representative for each role. Make sure everyone is present and close enough to the real workflow. And so you might want to have some other criteria, right? Obviously, putting a meeting together. And so then what's the next thing? So now we want to retrieve the current process maps, CMR, screenshots. So you want to bring this information into the chat, right? So if you have process maps, policies, and any kind of screenshots maybe from your EMR system, you can go ahead and add them in, right? And so what we want to do is I'm going to do this. Just mock up some information for demonstration. But what you want to do is you want to read through these prompts ahead of time. What you want to do is you want to gather your information. You can do it or your admin. Here's a clear, realistic summary. And so it's going to mock up some data. So purpose, make sure all your patients are assessed quickly upon arrival, prioritized by acuity, and have a documented triage level, right? Key components, then your handoff policy, purpose. Sure, I'm not going to lead through all these, and then you want to create a process map, right? So here's what I created for me. You can take this you can actually ask ChatGPT to draw a pretty picture. You can take it into Lucid Charts and draw it and add pictures and make it interesting. And then here's creating a handoff checklist. Now, I don't know if SBAR is an industry term, but this is interesting. ChatGPT that will try to do this for you. It gives you a nice term that you can remember, and it sounds like a cool little term that you made up, which I think we did here. And then go through and help people understand what you're going to do when you're going through the triage. And then here's your sample reference chart. Again, you may or may not have these. If you have these, you're going to want to feed that into ChatGPT. And then here's a process flow. Again, you could take this into another tool, like I said, like Lucid Charts, something like that. Draw it a little nicer, Canva possibly. And then comes down with the handoff. Okay. So then we're going to continue down. And so the next prompt is we're going to create a checklist. I can do it. Give me a sample of your current steps, any transcript notes from your observation, and I'll draft the checklist, right? So again, I'm going to hand them the prompt and then tell them to please mark up data for demonstration purposes. Okay. Again, going to keep saying this, but you're going to want your own information. If you collect it ahead of time, this will go really quick. Right. So here's a clear practical checklist, right? Now, so this is all made up from the ether. And so patient arrival, greeted, registered promptly. I like this when I go to the doctor's office. The doctor down the road, they're very good about this. When you go into the hospital down here, you walk in, it's very clear where you need to go. You register, immediately. They move you through really fast registration process, and then you sit down and you get to watch TV and to avoid people coughing on you. It's always fun, right? You agree on triage the assessment, go through, right? So here's your checklist. And again, you go through more detail, modifying that up. Here's an example that it mocked up from the data. And again, this type of information that maybe you then turn this around and automate this. You build screens or talk to your dev guys. Right? And now we're going to move on to the fourth step. And again, you could use process mapping, Lucid. And what you want to do is you're going to create a cross-functional group through mapping and patient triage, right? So you're going to want to whiteboard it in Lucid. Continue with our demo data. If anybody watching this has actual data that you want me to help you work through, feel free to contact me. And I'd be more than happy to take you through these steps and use your actual data. And I won't share it, obviously. It's stuff that's proprietary to your organization, but it'll be pretty useful and it'll be fun to see. So we're going to facilitate questions for each step, triage, the assessment, placement, weighting. I'll generate a set of facilitation questions or an agenda you can use for a meeting, right? So this is what you're going to be talking through as you're going through the workflow. And then, so here's mock-up of demo data from the session, right? Think about these templates and what you're going to be using them for. During the session, encourage candor and warts and all honesty. Otherwise, you'll get an idealized version, not the version of data improvements, right? And so you're going to want to go through this. And again, use Lucid charts. Again, if you need help with that, there's some fun ways that you can set up voting and or almost like a retrospective where you can help them put the data together, and then Lucid will help you organize it. And then it adds some cool tools for doing some automated voting and things like that. Not automated voting, but anonymous voting. And then it'll automatically show it. It's pretty cool. So then we get to the fifth one. It's identify variations between roles and shifts. Develop a quick survey or discussion guide to ask staff how they triage and handoff, right? I can do it. I'll draft the summary. Okay, so let's have them do it. Or her, your LLM may be female. So ED triage and handoff. Background for participants, give some information, and then here's some general questions. How would you describe your role in the triage and the handoff process? And this is normal kind of stakeholder management kind of questions, right? And so you go through there, and it leads you through this process, right? And then now validate the workflow map. So write a short feedback request to the front line. So after you have the information, you're going to bring all that information in. And again, please input. So what you're going to do is you're going to keep this chat flowing. And you can actually, I don't know how many of you have done this, but what I typically do now when I'm facilitating a meeting is I'll use ChatGPT to help facilitate. So you can help run through the meeting and the agenda and use ChatGPT to help you collaborate in the meeting. And then as you create the artifacts, you can do things like, let's say you work on a chart in Lucid. You can take a picture of that chart and just upload it, or take a screenshot and paste it into the prompt template, into the prompt, and can read it and understand it, right? So you can have your visual workflow and then take a couple screenshots, taking some write notes, parse out those handwritten notes. It's a huge time saver. And so you can take that and drop it into ChatGPT, and then it'll do a pretty good summary. And then what you can do is you can optionally attach the pictures. So, it comes back with this email. Hi, team, put together a draft or updated triage and handoff workflow. And we'd really value your feedback. So now you have the summary from the session. It builds a response. It builds the email for you, right? And so then it just mocked up some of the information. And now we're going to summarize, save the agreed upon process map, and summarize things, right? So summarize finalized workflow in a format suitable for inclusion in our SOP. Again, this is a good way to bring it in. You can actually, I prefer to pretty things up in Lucid Charts or dump it into something like Canva or PowerPoint if you want to go to PowerPoint and clean them up, or just include the actual picture, right? Take a screenshot of it and load it into your slides and then build summary documentation. So you'd want to, again, please mock this up. What you would want to do is go ahead and attach it. Go ahead and attach. And what you can do is if you have specific pictures you want to put in there, you can just instruct the LLM, say, hey, put placeholders where you think the image for the workflow should go. And it'll, instead of creating its own picture, it'll put a little bracket and say, insert your workflow image here, right? Which is cool. So now it's creating your SOP. There's your workflow. Again, this is where I'd probably create something in loose chart, make it pretty. Step-by-step description, patient arrival, patients arrive, an EMS, basic identification, registration, triage assessment, acuity. Good thing I'm actually reading that word, acuity assignment, ED placement, bed assignment. There, your S bar that you created, right? Nice little acronym so that people understand it. Situation, background, assessment, recommendation. Interesting. Provider evaluation, ongoing assessments. Again, this is a pretty good draft, right? So you can go in and make sure you're editing this and create a nice document, drop it in SharePoint or wherever. Let's see. And then last thing, distribute the map to all the staff, write a communication plan to the staff. So let's do that. So you hand off update, ensure all the ED staff are informed, announcement email, post any short stuff. And so it goes ahead and it drafts these emails for you, right? Announcement email. Here it is. And then again, you can work with it to tailor it and go about your merry way. It's a summary table of what you did and the process that we followed, right? Assemble the team. And then who does it? You. Gathered the docs, you. Observe process, you and me as ChatGPT. Facilitate meeting. Me, generate, facilitate, right? So you can ChatGPT facilitate your meeting, validate things. And if you want any of the prompts expand or whatever, so now what you can do on the left-hand side, as you're working through these prompts, what I would do is I would edit the prompts. And if you find that they need modification or you need other information, gather the information and feed it and see what you're getting out of the prompt, and then modify the prompts. Save that off because you may want to go through this process again. But as you're going through it, what's happening is that you think about this. If you go through and you create all of these steps, right? This is step one. I don't know. Oh, excuse the massive scrolling, but so we came here and we did step one. So we mapped the current triage and handoff workflow. What you would do now is once that you have this, and I would separate these pieces out, put them where you want, create your SOP, save off the emails either in a draft folder, have them ready, go through some edits, get this done. And then what you want to do is move on to step two and identify key bottlenecks and root causes, right? So now what you can do is go through the same process and go through step two, right? So what you would do is you'd give it the prompt. So now what you would do is go back and say for step two, identify the relevant experts and combine their collective approaches. You want to, if you do it in the same chat, ChatGPT is better about remembering you across all of your chats, but if you want to keep it focused, do it in the same chat. What it's going to do is it's going to continue to use this matrix of experts that you created. So again, to walk you through again, I don't want you to think that you just come in and copy and paste things, right? So you come in, you start with this, you evaluate it and decide, is this what I want? Does this make sense? Do I need to eliminate project scope creep? You're a project manager and you say no to that, I think we have a problem. But look at these, modify this list or this matrix, and then hone it to what makes sense for you. And then you move on to the next prompt, gives you the experts. Now, what you can do is if you're actually in healthcare, you would know if these are the right personas. If they're not the right personas, change it before you go on to the next step. And then when you get to this step and it identifies people, maybe your CEO in your organization is well written or has a lot of information out on the web or the LLM, or you have access to it, you can feed it in, then use them as the expert. And so now what's happening is you're going to get, like I said before, in a consulting company I worked at in a prior life, they took frameworks from Connor and a couple of other people. And I think even the Marine Corps, something called BAMKIS or something like that. Ask Dennis. But anyhow, they brought all these together and created their own change management process, right? So do the same, right? Use your experts to come up with your own processes that make sense for your organization. And then do things like, again, I love the fact that it came up with some acronyms that we can use, SBAR, right? And so run through these, tell it what you want it to do, look at the prompts. When you go to run this prompt, do you want to make some edits? You saw what I did, right? I didn't have the data, so I asked it to mock it up. You can do the same. If you just want to work through it, you can mock up data. But I would really suggest that you look through the prompts and gather that information ahead of time. You'd be amazed at the type of things that it can do. And again, don't worry if it's an old PDF, take a screenshot of it. If it's an old project plan, take a screenshot. If it's old diagrams, maybe 2 years ago, you guys sketched this out on a whiteboard, take those pictures and feed them to ChatGPT. He'll be able to break them down, understand them, and maybe even explain them to you if you forgot what they are. So anyway, so again, just kind of part of the training that I do, helping people create more complicated prompts to actually solve problems at work, either role deliverables, or you can see we can create SOPs to address specific KPIs in the organization that you may be responsible for. And so contact me on LinkedIn or through the Agile Network. And subscribe to my YouTube channel because I'm going to put prompts like this and extended prompts up. And I'll share the prompts from the Notion notebook. Have a great day. Thanks.
The world is racing forward with AI and uncertainty. The biggest mistake you can make in your career right now is to stand still. So the question isn't if you should embrace AI, it's how. Should you be a generalist or a specialist? And in today's economy, becoming a generalist with AI is the route to go. To understand how to make it work in your current job, how can you do automation? How can you embrace all of the AI technology around you and encompass it into you moving forward in your career by helping your company and by helping you grow with these new skills? So you need to embrace change. Remember, it's not the biggest and the strongest that survive. It's the people that have the ability to adapt. So if you want more insights like this, follow me on LinkedIn or subscribe to my YouTube channel, and let's shape this future together.